Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. A heads up for those who have newly joined us. You probably need a word of warning. This is definitely not a safe space for those.
For those.
Now I'm totally befuddled. I don't know what my
let me finish what you're
doing.
For those who might be offended by having their ideas challenged, right? Don, are you there?
I'm lost. I'm totally lost here.
No, there you go. There's the splash screen. There you go. Oh, now it's gone.
What? Now what am I doing?
I don't know.
Yes. Well, I got it. I got it.
Okay, you got it.
Now we're here. Okay. Anyway, we have Eric Johnson. This is week number 104. We have Eric Johnson from Mormonism Research Ministries to talk about his new book, Sharing the Good News with Mormons. And now I have to find my way back to the correct screen here. I think I have it. And stop sharing. There we go. Stop sharing. And get a camera back.
There you are.
My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And then I'll explain what happened.
Yes, we are professionals, so don't try this at home. You've seen the dangers now. You know what's at stake here. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this program include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet and the Heresy Conservation Board, ensuring sustainable errors for the 21st century and beyond. The Heresy Conservation Board. And if you really like this program, oops, what was that? Don, it's catching. I don't even know.
I'm not even at your computer. You're in Florida.
And you still, okay, here, I'm going to skip over that. Here we go. To ensure continued access to this program, if you like it, or if you don't and you just want to annoy others with it, please go to midwestoutreach.org on your browser and click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. midwestoutreach.org. And here we are.
Okay. So here's what happens, guys, is I have two instances of this running. I have the live one that we're doing, and then I have what everyone else is watching, so I can toggle back and forth. And if I forget to turn the speaker off, then when I start talking, I start hearing myself, which gets me really confused.
It's kind of like when you call into the radio stations and there's that 6-second delay and people say, turn off your radio.
That's exactly what it's like. And I'm confused going, okay, where's that coming from? Now I'm hearing voices. So anyway, Eric Johnson, who works with our good friend Bill McKeever at Mormonism Research Ministries. And we were talking a little bit before we started that they've been working together since 1989, right?
Right.
1989. So that was 10 years before the world ended. So we're going to party like it's 1999, right?
Yeah.
And to quote what was someone who's Prince? What does he call himself now? Formerly known as Prince.
Well, no, he's dead now, so he doesn't call himself anything.
He doesn't call himself anything. Okay.
Yeah, he passed away. That's very sad because it could have been avoided and something to do with prescriptions. But anyways, yeah, he was the artist formerly known as Prince for a while.
That's right.
Then he was like the artist. And then
Which
he
has
decided
nothing to do with Mormonism because he was a Jehovah's Witness, as it turns out.
So why are we talking about him? I don't know.
I don't know because I wandered off the beam, as I often do. I'm known to do that. But we have Eric Johnson to talk about their new book, Sharing the Good News with Mormons, and there's the picture right there. I like the tie. I mean, that's kind of a nice effect and a little badge that Mormons.
I like that. It's a very conservative tie. You know, it's not one of those. But you know, it's not a. You know, they say the kind of tie that people trust is a kind of tie where the stripes. It's a stripe tie, where the stripe goes from, let's see, the right to left. You know, as you're looking at it. And that's the tie that most people trust. So if you wear that kind of a tie, they'll listen to you.
Well, let me tell you how that happened.
Now we're going to critique his tie choice. Huh?
Yeah.
That cover has actually gotten a lot of buzz because it is so creative. And when they came up with the ideas for the different cover designs, they gave, I think 2 or 3 they gave us. And when I first saw that, it was so much better than just a regular old cover design because it shows missionary.
Right.
It's certainly one of the chapters written by Sandra Tanner actually deals with how do you talk to Mormon missionaries. But yeah, it's just a creative, simple but creative, and it's gotten a lot of buzz.
The only thing you could have done is like put him on a bicycle, but other than you got that close up there, you know. And,
I love it.
Yeah.
No, it is perfect. It's simple, and I like all the white space. That's really good. Josh McDowell, and you have several authors involved. You know, it's not just you and Bill, although that would be good by itself, but forward by Josh McDowell, a name that most who are involved in Defense of the Faith are aware of. You, Mark Middleburg, my friend Mark Middleburg, Josh's son Sean McDowell has contributed. Matt Slick from CARM, Dr. Robert Bowman, very, very fine, good friend of ours as well.
Eric, what did you do in this book? I mean, come on. I mean,
well, I'm the one that came up with the idea. Actually, came up with the idea in 2016. In the fall, I had somebody ask me the proverbial question, what's the one way that we could use to win a Mormon to Jesus? We get that question all the time, as I'm sure you guys get that with Jehovah's Witnesses. I
call that the silver bullet syndrome.
Yeah, right. And that's what I get asked all the time. And so somebody asked me again, and I said this. I said, you know, we get that asked all the time, a nickel for every time I get asked it. I'd be a very rich man. I wish somebody would just write a book with all the different ideas, and that would be a great
When do you think somebody's going to do that? Oh,
well, and well, I went to bed that night, and I don't know if you've ever had that experience of waking up in the middle of the night, and it's like God telling you, okay, man, oh man, that's a great idea. You got to go for it. And without getting into, you know, the charismatic idea, I mean, I really felt that, okay, this would be a great idea, but it's an evangelistic book and it's directed toward Mormons. I thought to myself, there's no way a publisher is going to do that. So I started to call my friends in the ministry, and I said, would you write a chapter for this book that I'm thinking about, and I'm going to self-publish it? Well, I got 10 or 12 chapters together from different people. And at the end of 2016, I get a couple of phone calls, one from my friend Andrew Rappaport in New Jersey. He does open air evangelism, and he's in this book. And I also got one from J. Warner Wallace, a friend of mine who wrote Cold Case Christianity. And they heard about the book idea, and they said, what are you thinking about trying to self-publish that? I said, well, nobody's going to want this book because I published books with Baker and Bethany House and Kriegel, and I just didn't figure that they would want a book this specialized in an evangelism.
Really? I would guess that they would. I mean, if I were a publisher, I would think the opposite. But go ahead.
Well, I based on what they said you need to get a few other people involved, and you need to get some people who have some names. So I didn't know everybody. For instance, David Geisler, I'd never met him, but I asked if he would do a chapter. I asked if Mark Middleburg and a few others, and they all agreed. And then I approached in the spring of 2017 Baker Book and asked if they would want to do the book. And they looked at it and they just decided it wasn't going to be a selling book, which I fully understand. This is not going to be a bestseller. And so they said no. And so then I called my friend Sean McDowell, the son of Josh McDowell. He's an apologist in his own right. He's written, I think, 15 or 20 books. I worked with him on a Bible project, the Apologetic Study Bible for Students. And I ended up talking to him, and he says, let me talk to Harvest House. I think this might be the perfect book for them. As it turns out, they agreed. They wanted Sean involved, which I was in favor of, even though Sean's not an expert in Mormonism. He's a great apologist. And so Sean and I then put this together, and we started writing this in, well, a lot of the chapters were already written, but in the fall of 2017 is when we officially started. And in the next 4 months, put everything together. It was quite a chore to get 26 people to work together and hit their deadlines. And then I had a couple of good editors on my end, my daughter, Carissa, and Sharon Lindblom, who works with us at MRM. And we ended up getting it out in June. which it wasn't supposed to get out till September, but we wanted to introduce this book at Manti, the Mormon Miracle Pageant, where Christians from all over the United States come to share their faith with Mormons during a 2-week conference that, not a conference, but it's a pageant, a play that is put on by the Mormons. And so the publisher was willing to move it up 3 months, which required hitting our deadlines and making sure everything was done right. And the result is a book that you guys have in your hands. And I just, I'm really excited about this book because already we've seen residuals from the book. People who have actually tried some of these told us that, man, it worked, giving them ideas to maybe not do exactly what the chapter said, but maybe to do something similar. And so we've already seen results, and that is what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide a resource that had the ability for people to say, how do I talk to Mormons? Well, there's 24 chapters here in here that have different ways, and you don't have to do any of them, but at least consider the ideas, and possibly, if you use them, see if it works, because they work for us.
Yeah.
You know, here's something that's important. I think is sort of coming out in the book, not directly maybe, but indirectly. And it speaks to this issue of how, what do I say to a Mormon? Because when I get the question, I start off with this. It depends on how you use information, and it depends on how they hear information. Whether it's a Mormon, a Jehovah's Witness, a Christian Scientist, it doesn't really matter, an atheist. Why are they what they are, and what is it that you have that you can discuss with them in an intelligent and passionate way? So if you're talking to a Jehovah's Witness, for example, and you want to talk about their false prophecy, but they became a Jehovah's Witness because they never had any friends, they don't care about prophecy. That's not their thing. So there's something else that you want to try to reach out to them with, and it might be a relationship instead of battering them with false prophecy or false teaching or something like that. Right. You're kind of doing that here. You're saying, okay, you have helping them evaluate truth claims, Mark Middleburg, the straight thinking approach. So it's more kind of intellectual, or the evidential approach, Sean McDowell. So there's ways to do this. There's not a one-size-fits-all sort of methodology here, right?
Right. You're exactly right. Those first 4 chapters, we specifically use those chapters to deal with the Mormons who end up leaving Mormonism, and then they say nothing else can be true if the church is true. Christianity can't be true. We hear that on a regular basis, and they head toward agnosticism or atheism. So the first section doesn't really deal specifically with a tactic or an approach as what we use for the word in the book, but rather it's, well, the first chapter, just understanding that there are different worldviews and what a worldview is. Mark Middleburg goes into that, and he gives 5 different types of worldviews. And then Sean talks about, is there even a God? Chapter 3, Matt Slick goes into, is the Bible trustworthy? Because for so many years, a Mormon has been told when he's been in the church that the Bible is true as far as it's translated correctly. And whenever it contradicts Mormon doctrine, well, we're not so sure that's translated well. And so he deals with that topic. And then finally, Rob Bowman talks about Jesus, because it's possible to believe in Jesus, but not believe in the right Jesus. 2 Corinthians 11:4 talks about that possibility is true. So in those 4 chapters, we wanted to set a background, because you may end up seeing a Latter-day Saint leave Mormonism, but we have found that about 80% of everybody who leaves heads directly over to the atheism route, and we want to prevent that. We don't think they should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but they should consider the fact that, yes, they were lied to, that they were in a false religious system, but at the same time, there really is a God. There really is a Jesus who loves them. There really is salvation by grace, where there's nothing you have to do in order to earn the justification, which we call justification by faith alone. So that was that first section. And then the other 5 sections are more dealing with specific ways that you can actually talk to a Latter-day Saint to get him to think on his own. And that's what this book is about, is to get the Mormons to not just accept what they've always believed, but to give them some information, to provide some way for them to shake them a little bit. So they have to do some thinking. And when we find that when they think for themselves, it's more likely that they'll start to question some of the things that they've been taught for so many years.
So did I hear you right? You said about 80% that leave Mormonism go into atheism?
That it's an unofficial number, but we know it's more than 50%. And I actually volunteer at Sandra Tanner's Utah Lighthouse Bookstore in Salt Lake City on Saturdays. Bill and I take turns, and so we're there. It's a place where many people, many Latter-day Saints know about the bookstore. They're not supposed to go there. Sandra carries some specialized books on Mormonism, some scholarly books, and so people will come in, and I'm going to tell you, about half of everybody who comes in to that bookstore is a former Mormon. And even if they're atheist or they've just left the church, I'm going to say that stat is pretty close. We have found that they're not going to Christianity, that they have to have somebody in their lives who's a Christian for them to even consider Christianity. And that would be an encouragement to anybody who's listening to this. If maybe you don't do a lot of evangelism, but you know Mormons, but having somebody there when they leave to be able to hold their hand and take them to church. In fact, we have a chapter written by a pastor, Dr. Brian Hurlbut, chapter 16, and that's his strategy: the power of a simple invitation, the come and see approach, to take them to a thriving church where they can see the gospel actually being proclaimed and they can see Christians in action. And so, yeah, it's just based on my experience. I can't tell you how many people. I'll ask them, did you used to be LDS? Yes. What are you now? Well, I just left 6 months ago, and right now I'm nothing. And, that's frustrating.
This is important because it applies to a lot of groups, not just Mormons. Here's my take on it, which again is not scientific. It's just my personal view based on my experience. Is there's a difference between those who are what I would call walk-offs. They just said, I'm done and I'm leaving, and those who were sort of counseled out or had a friend who was a Christian and understood the faith and could answer questions in a biblical way, non-confrontationally. So, right. For example, we did a book on Bill Gothard some years ago, and we had a state senator who most of his volunteers for his campaigns were former Gothard kids, and they'd all become atheists. They left Gothardism and became atheists. And so he himself had been involved in Gothardism. And so he read our book and he called me up and he said, I need 2 cases of your books right away. Because all of my volunteers are former Gothard kids raised in their homeschooling, and they've left and they are now atheists. And I said, okay, here's the problem. Because God and Gothard both begin with G-O and end in D, they've confused them and think they are the same thing. And so in rejecting Gothard, they rejected God because there was no difference in their minds. As they started reading the material and he would talk to them biblically, they began realizing that there is a sharp distinction between the two, and they could believe in God without having to embrace Gothardism. I would suggest Mormons have a similar problem.
Well, that kind of leads to a question I have, and that is there a pattern? I mean, we're pretty familiar with Gothard, and why people leave. I mean, it's usually they just, what they see doesn't match, what they see the inconsistencies.
Right.
Yeah, legalism inevitably leads not only into bondage, but you start to have to morally compromise because nobody can be that good.
Right.
So they see the moral compromises, and it's like, is anything real? If this guy wasn't real, I thought this guy was represented the truth. I thought he was the most real. My parents told me this guy has got it down more than anybody else, and they get to see him close up when they work with him at the Institute, and he totally lets them down. Is there a pattern similar to that among Mormons? Is there a reason, a standard or typical reason why they leave and then leave into either nothing or atheism?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say there's a couple of reasons why Latter-day Saints leave. And you have to understand them leaving is a very difficult thing because their whole social life is around the organization and everything they've ever done. Their wife, their family, their friends, their coworkers, especially if you live in the West, you live in Utah, Idaho, Arizona, very high numbers of Mormons here. But the number one reason they're leaving, and we've seen this in the last few years, is the church history. From 2013 to 2015, the church has published over a dozen essays called the Gospel Topics Essays. You can actually go and on their website and actually read these, where they admit to things that Latter-day Saints never knew before, many of them at least. And yet it's been talked about for many, many years in Sandra Tanner's work and the things that Bill and I have done. And on the internet, you can find these things, such as Joseph Smith having between 30 and 40 wives. They have admitted in the essay that, yes, he did. And they gave reasons why, but they don't give very good reasons why he was marrying other men's wives. In fact, 11 of his wives, of the 30 to 40 wives, were currently married to living husbands, or that a third of his wives were teenagers. They don't give a very good reason why. They also, in one of the essays, explain that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon using a magic stone called a seer stone. He would put it into a hat. He would actually put his face into the hat. It would light up. And that's how he did it, not the way of using your finger to run across the lettering on these gold plates. And in fact, the church is now even putting out art, church art, that shows the hat that Joseph Smith. In fact, a few months ago, they had in the Inside magazine where the plates, Joseph Smith is sitting there with Oliver Cowdery, his scribe, and the plates are covered up in a sack. He can't even see the plates, but he's got the hat there. But they only show about a third of the hat. So you have to kind of look for it. But now they've admitted that in this essay. That really threw a lot of Latter-day Saints who thought that he translated letter by letter, kind of his finger running across the Reformed agenda. And then another essay talks about the Book of Abraham and says it is not a traditional translation like we would call a translation, but rather it was a spiritual translation. So the Book of Abraham papyri that we recovered in 1966 and 67 that the church currently owns today. Yes, it's common in funeral papyri, but at the same time, Joseph Smith used his prophetic ability to read between the lines and to be able to come up with words that supposedly Abraham wrote. I mean, for a lot of Latter-day Saints finding that out, they get very upset because historically, this is not true. The history does not coincide. So that would be one, would be the history. And then I think the second is showing, well, what I like to do with my approach in the book. I like to show the Latter-day Saint that they're not able to do everything that Mormonism says you have to do, because they know, they've been taught since they were little kids in primary and all the way through seminary, the high school classes they took, institute, going on their mission, that they needed to keep the commandments continually. They needed to keep all of them. How often? All the time. You can ask any Latter-day Saint. He knows the rules. Then you ask the question, so how are you doing at that? And they recognize that, well, I'm not doing so well, but I'm trying. But the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants does not allow for a person just to try, but rather they use the slogan that Nike took later on, just do it. It's possible to do. Why aren't you doing it? And they always say, well, I hope to someday. And we always say, well, go talk to the oldest person in your ward, the most righteous person, and ask, are they ready to go to the celestial kingdom when they die? And they'll even say, well, I still repent. And repenting is an admission that you're not doing everything that you're supposed to do. And yet the Book of Mormon says it's possible to do. So why aren't you doing it? So those I find are the two biggest reasons where people just become discouraged with the church. And no matter how attached they are, they end up leaving. They may leave officially, but they also may leave quietly. And in fact, the Mormon population of 16 million, estimates are that only 4 or 5 million of them are actually active. The Jehovah's Witnesses only have 8 or 9 million. And you would say, well, Mormons are a lot bigger. I don't know if I would say that, because Jehovah's Witnesses don't baptize somebody until they're sure they're going to stick. And then if they end up leaving the church, they get them off the church rolls. The Mormon church will keep you on the church rolls unless you ask to get off. So
in fact, the Mormons only count you if you're doing door-to-door work and you turn in your time card.
I mean the JWs. The JWs.
I mean the JWs. The JWs only count if you're going door-to-door and you turn in your time card each month. Then you're counted. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not.
So basically, it boils down to two things: doctrine. In other words, they're teaching these things, but the evidence doesn't line up. And so there's the intellectual, rational side of it that, hey, it's not as advertised. And then, the other thing is the practical, nobody can do this. And yet they tell us we can, but nobody's doing it. I'm not doing it. They're not doing it. It's that, are you, come to me, all you who are weak and heavy laden, Jesus says, and I will give you rest. Well, there's nobody there to give them rest in their church. They have people who bind heavy burdens on their backs and don't even use a finger to lift them off. So,
yeah.
I wanted to do a question here on one of the chapters before we take our first little break.
Okay.
Dr. Corey Miller, Undermining Confidence in a Mormon's Personal Testimony, the Police Lineup Approach. Mm-hmm. What is that? How does that work?
Well, he has, in fact, let me just read the summary because that, I think, does a good job in his chapter. And we tried to make these summaries count. And this is what he says. Many Christians fail to realize the central role that a testimony plays in the Mormon psyche, preventing hardier and seemingly more important discussions on essential matters such as God and salvation. To have a truly fruitful conversation, it is vital for the Christian to wean the Mormon's reliance on it early in the discussion by causing doubt about which testimony is more reliable. Part of the problem when you're talking to a Latter-day Saint, and you guys know when you've talked to others out there, not so much Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very much more doctrinally oriented generally, but there are many Mormons who may not know very much about the teachings of the church. They really don't care. It's more, again, of a social organization, and it's also the testimony that they receive. They believe that they need to read the Book of Mormon, and the missionaries will tell you that you're supposed to read the Book of Mormon, and in Moroni 10:4, it says that you can pray about this, and if you pray with a sincere heart and true intent, that God will make manifest to you that this book is true and that Mormonism is a true religion. And so what he tries to do here is what he calls the police lineup approach, is to get them to understand, well, we have a testimony as well. And just because we have this testimony, it doesn't necessarily make it true. Muslims have a testimony. There are over 1 billion Muslims, and they say the Shahada, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and boom, you're in. First of the 5 pillars of faith. And yet, just because they believe, and by the way, Muslims believe in Jesus too. They have Jesus as one of the greatest prophets, and he's talked about in the Quran. And if you talk to a faithful Muslim, they'll say, Jesus, peace be upon him. They treat him very respectfully, and yet that's a different Jesus. I can get a Mormon to agree that that is a different Jesus. Well, let's take a look at who Jesus is, for instance, in the chapter that Rob Bowman wrote, and we can say there's differences here. There's differences in the idea of who God is. There's differences in the way that a person receives salvation. Mormonism and Christianity cannot be the same. One of them has to be wrong. We both could be wrong, but both of us cannot be right. If I can get a Mormon to agree to that, then I say, okay, you have a testimony and but have you ever had your testimony falter? Have you ever had, for instance, your feelings distract you? Because the Bible says the heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can understand it? So to help them to understand that, yeah, they were in love when they were in 8th grade. They loved that person, and then finally they later found out it was infatuation. Are you absolutely sure? What are you going to do with the problems of Mormonism? What are you going to do with the idea that the Book of Mormon is not the most correct book on earth, as Joseph Smith said? What are you going to do when you see that the evidence archaeologically does not support a Book of Mormon, whether it's on the American continent or Central America? Scholars can't agree. There are differences there. So his chapter deals specifically with working with that testimony, so vital, because if you can't trump a testimony. I mean, I can give my testimony and so there we are. We're even Steven. Where do we go from there? And that's what he's trying to do is, and he calls it the police lineup, where he's going to try to dissect that and show them that the testimony they have to be willing to agree. Maybe I'm willing to go look out and see what else is there and see what the evidence is, and then go with where the evidence leads you, not just go based on something that I have good feelings because I grew up in this church, because I'm married in the church. And we have found a lot of Latter-day Saints, when they come to that point of willing to look at the evidence, are more likely than to say, boy, this is a fraud.
Yeah, sounds wrong. You know, I was talking with a friend earlier today about someone else who doesn't attend a church, because he looks around and he goes, well, all of the churches, you know, there's so much heresy in all of the churches, and I just want to be like the first century church. You know,
but there was no heresy.
Yeah, where there was this pristine faith, and I said, well, I don't. He probably hasn't actually read the Bible, because nearly every letter we have was written to refute and correct heresy and error
that
in the
had
first
gotten
century
into
church.
the church. Yeah,
Right. But we are concerned. In fact, one of our sponsors is concerned about.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a question of sustainability, really, when you think about it. I mean, yeah. So that's why we have to warn everybody. You know what? The situation is dire. According to the latest research, at the present rate of consumption, our supply of heresies will be completely depleted by 2050. The consequences will be disastrous. If this happens, most cults will close their doors by the end of the century, and most heretical websites will completely disappear from the internet, not to mention the fact that 75% of what passes as Christian programming will disappear from the airwaves and cable TV. The solution is simple: heresy recycling. Whether you're online, visiting a church, or out at the mall, you can do your part. Always look for the HCB label, the Heresy Conservation Board, ensuring sustainable errors for the 21st century and beyond. The Heresy Conservation Board.
And there you have it.
It just scares me to think what could happen if we don't.
I mean, if all the heresy vanished, Eric, we would be just out of a job.
Well, I tell you,
what would we
at
do?
least we have till 2050. So you know, that's my lifetime, I think. So
I think
we had some.
I'll be 91 that year.
Yes, some years ago we had 2 Mormon missionaries that we met with, and I'm from Missouri. I actually am from Missouri.
I always thought you were making that up.
No, I actually am from. I'm not just in Missouri. I am from Missouri. I kept saying, you know, I need evidence. I understand you guys have your testimony, but I have prayed over a number of things. I've prayed over the Upanishads, and they didn't really know what that was, and the Quran, and you know, but I need evidence. You have actual evidence that would support the claims of Mormonism. And they said, well, you know, we don't know. They're about 18 or 19 years old, young men. And so they said, we don't know. And I said, well, I really need evidence. They said, well, let's check. We'll get back to you. So they left. And then 2 days later, they called and they said, you know what, we have one of our archaeologists lives about 20 minutes from where you are in Naperville, Illinois. It's a guy named David Palmer. And he's written some books on Mormon archaeology in search of Cumorah. And he's agreed to meet with you. Would you meet with him? I said, love to. This would be great. Meet an actual Mormon archaeologist. How cool is that, right? So we went over there and met with David and with these 2 Mormon missionaries who Joy kept referring to as the boys, which did not sit well with David. He kept, you know, correcting her. They're the elders. And she goes, okay, yeah, the boys. So he did this whole presentation he does in Mormon churches. And oddly enough, the archaeology is occurring not in North America, but in Central America, which you alluded to. And he goes through and he's making statements about, you know, this is about the same time as the Book of Mormon. This might be similar to the Book of Mormon. This is kind of alluded to by the Book of Mormon. And then he gets to a map of Central America and he turns it and tells us, you know, this is true north, but this is Mormon north, he says, which he had to do because the Book of Mormon describes the geography as seas north, seas south, seas east, seas west, and Central America doesn't really fit that. And he gets all done with that. And he said, if I had none of this evidence, I still have my burning in the bosom. And he got all done. And I said, I just really have just one question. You've said this might be, this alludes to, this is similar, this is, do you have any actual evidence? I mean, a Solomonic temple would be really great. But, barring that, a coin, a children's toy would be. And he looked at me and he said, no, we haven't found anything.
Right.
And the two missionaries were shocked. The next day, they were moved someplace else in the country. We don't know where.
Yeah, that's common.
Moving the missionaries, you mean, or is common?
Yeah. If well, they move them around anyway. Men serve for 2 years at the age of 18 till 20, and then the females can serve from 19 to 20 and a half, and they might move 4 or 5 times and have different partners depending. But yeah, if there's any kind of a problem, they're gone.
What's the reason for age difference between men and women?
Well, it used to be that the men would be 19 and the women would be 20. And many of the women were getting married before they had a chance to go on their missions. But the church I think it was 2014, if I'm not mistaken, they decided that they were going to bring the missionary ages down. It actually was a very smart move. And so now 18-year-olds, and so right after high school, many missionaries go right into the field without going a year into college, that they had to wait till they were 19. But what they really did successfully is they got many more females to go in. And so they have today over 70,000 missionaries. When in 2014, there were about 55,000. They had gotten the number actually up to close to 90,000 when they were double dipping, because they had missionaries who were 18 and 19 going out there. But yeah, go ahead.
Women wait till 19 as opposed to 18 for what reason?
Well, they don't really encourage the females to go on their mission if they don't want to. That gives them a year to maybe get married. But having a year less to be able to get married, now many more females are going onto the field. And it's interesting. That's a good point you're bringing out, because at 18, males generally are not as mature as the female at 18, and then making them wait until 19. But they still have this idea that the woman's most important role is to be a mother. And if she has some kind of a relationship with somebody, they still have that opportunity to just get married and not go on their mission. And the Mormons get married generally at a much earlier age than the average population. I know people here who, in fact, I just talked to a Mormon on Friday down at Temple Square, and he's 19 and is married. Not going to go on. He didn't go on his mission. He decided to get married instead at 18. And that's not as common as it might be thought, but more females are getting married at an earlier age than the men.
Is it frowned upon he got married at 18 instead of going on his mission, two-year mission? Is that
if he's not going to go on a mission, then the one reason not to go is you're getting married. And
that's okay.
I talked to him about that, actually. That's a good question to ask. And I said, because he had a friend there who was 17 and was going on his mission next year after he graduates from high school. And his friend basically said, yeah, if you get married, it's fine. But if you decided not to go on your mission and you weren't getting married, then it's not required, but there's a social aspect. You will be looked down upon by many of the people in the church. So you pretty much want to do that. Not only that, but when you get back at the age of 20, now you go to the singles ward, and there's a lineup of women, young ladies, trying to meet you, and because they want to marry a return missionary. It has a lot of status. And it's like, maybe some people have the idea of marrying a soldier. Well, he served, he showed how admirable he was. And so a lot of these guys realize if they don't go on their mission, when they come, when they're 18, 19, these girls are looking for return missionaries. They might not be given the time of day. And so it's very much a social idea that if you don't do it, then you're probably not going to get the girl in the end.
What is this singles ward you mentioned?
A singles ward is made for people who are not yet married, and I don't quote me on this. I think it's from 20 to 30. So it's that age group, and it's made up. It will be at a church building, but it will be their own separate services. They have the men's and women's organizations there, but they're all single. So it's a great place to meet single people. I guess it's better than going on the internet. And then I think they're allowed to go there until they're 30. And then I don't think they're supposed to go there. I'm not that familiar with the singles ward, but that's generally what it is. So
do they have like bars that they can go to after that?
No, they don't. They, but it's
juice bars, maybe juice bars.
Yeah, it is it is actually kind of an interesting idea. Back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of churches in the United States would have singles groups. I don't know if you have that so much now. They might call it young adults. But they used to call them
career.
Yeah. And so it was a place where you got to study the Bible and Bible studies, and you were with people who were single. And so it was a great place to find out who you liked and maybe who you would date. I belonged to one when I was in my 20s in San Diego. And yeah, we dated within our group because we knew they were believers. We got to know them. We do social events. And I think that's the same kind of concept that the LDS Church has.
Now, you have a chapter on Mormon missionaries, and I think this is important. Now, I haven't read the chapter, so you're going to correct me if I say something that is wrong here. Okay. But in my experience, it is not. You're not going to lead a Mormon missionary to the faith for a couple of reasons. One is they're kind of watching each other to make sure that they don't get outside the faith.
Right.
Two, they don't really know very much. And I asked some Mormon missionaries a few times as I met with them, how much training do you receive about your theology? And they said, well, we don't really receive any. They teach them their 6 talks that they have to give. But, they say, well, either they expect that we know what we're supposed to believe, or that we can ask somebody, if someone asks us a question we don't have the answer to. What they really teach us is how to dress and how to represent ourselves in these 6 talks. So in your experience, is it very likely you're going to lead a Mormon missionary to the faith, or that you're just going to plant questions?
I think with any Latter-day Saint, the first time you ever talk to somebody, don't expect that they're going to say this little prayer at the end of your conversation and become a Christian and say, I'm done and I'm ready to join your church. It's very difficult to lead, but what you are doing, as Greg Koukl says in his book, Tactics, you're putting little pebbles in their shoe and you're making them uncomfortable. You're trying to get them to think on their own and come up with answers and see if their religion really is true, because error will always run from truth, but truth never runs from error. So you shouldn't have any fear. If it's true, doesn't matter what people bring, you'll be able to deflect everything. And so with the missionaries, and Sandra Tanner, by the way, wrote that chapter in the book and did a really good job. Of course, Sandra Tanner is the godmother to all of us who are in apologetics to the Mormon people. She and her husband, Gerald, who passed away, wrote Shadow of Reality and a number of other books that are so very important to what we do. But in that chapter, she is basically trying to get you to understand that Mormon missionaries are young people, typically. They are impressionable, and they have possibly been members since they were born. And so from cradle till 18, and now they are out on the field. And so she gives some different ideas of what you can say and do to be able to make an impact with the Latter-day Saints. But I'm going to say this, it is possible that people can become Christians when they get back on their missions and they get back home, and they had Christians who were giving them information. Oftentimes they don't have time during their mission oftentimes to do a lot of research, but they do have the ability to go do research further. But let me say this, with that being said, Don, I'm going to say that it is possible that a missionary could come off the field, and that would be Micah Wilder. I don't know if you're familiar with Micah Wilder. His mom, Lynn Wilder, was a professor at BYU. He went to Florida in 2005, and he was gung-ho, very much a believer in Mormonism. He went to a church pastor in Florida where he was serving, and the pastor listened to what he had to say because Micah was going to convert him. And if he could convert him, he said, I could win the whole church. Sure. And the pastor listened, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes to the whole presentation. And then Micah was saying, okay, well, so what are you going to do? And the pastor, in a gentle way, said, son, he says, you just don't know your Bible. I think you need to go read your Bible as a little child and see what it has to say. And Micah took him up on that challenge. He ended up reading on his mission, because they're given time each day to read scriptures. He read the New Testament, and I don't want to misquote it, but I think 19 times in the rest of his 2 years. He read the New Testament, Matthew through Revelation, 19 times.
Wow.
What ended up happening, you can go online and you can type in the word Unveiling Grace. There's a movie that's been written about it. And there's also a book called Unveiling Grace, written by Lynn Wilder. Long story short, Micah ends up getting sent home a week before he's done for an honorable discharge. He ends up, his whole family ends up coming out. And the Wilders have had an incredible impact on so many people. And today, Micah travels around the United States during the summers, and he and former missionaries that were friends, they have a band that's called Adams Road. And if you go to Adams Road Ministry, I think it's .com. If you go there, you can see all about their ministry. So even though it's very rare that something like Micah's situation happens, it is possible. So when you have missionaries, be kind to them. In fact, I even say invite them in, give them a cold glass of water and some snacks, maybe even take a barbecue and have them come over and get into conversations, get to know them. They're lonely. They only get to call home twice a year on Mother's Day and Christmas.
You're kidding.
That's all they're allowed to do. Yeah. And they're very regulated. They can write letters and they can do emails on Mondays, their day off. But other than that, 6 days a week, they're not allowed to have communication from home, no boyfriend, girlfriend communication. It's 2 years is a long time. And so anytime we can show Christian hospitality to somebody who's lonely like that, and be patient and not trying to yell down the missionaries. This pastor in Florida, I forget his name. It's written in the book and also in the video, Unveiling Grace. But man, that had a tremendous impact on Micah, and the kindness and love that was shown to him made him want to do what he said.
When I get calls from somebody who say they have Mormon missionaries come over, what verse do I give them? You know, the silver bullet central. I say, here's what you want to do. Listen very carefully. Make them a really good dinner. Invite them to dinner. Whether you talk about religion at all is not as important as in an hour and a half that you'll have them there. You will be able to find out why they're a Mormon, what's attracting them to them, what it is that they actually believe, and to be able to share what you believe in a non-confrontational way over fried chicken, because they don't get that many really good meals. I mean, they're living on a skinny budget. You know, just to hang out and drink some lemonade and eat some fried chicken or whatever it is that you're going to make, it means a lot.
Yeah. With the dawn of the internet, now I'm thinking beyond just Mormon missionaries now here, because if Mormon missionaries have their time very regimented, do I assume correctly that they may not be online all that much?
Oh no, they are. They're allowed to do a lot of communication, and in fact, there are missionaries. All they do is sit in a room and they talk to people on Mormon.org or LDS.org. You can actually talk to missionaries.
But as far as well, my point is that the internet has the availability of Christian apologetic information.
Right.
Made a huge dent in the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. Is the same happening with the LDS church?
It's good. You know, they have a chapter on this called Preaching from the Asbestos Suit, the Reasoning with Mormons on the Internet Approach.
Yeah, we do. And that's written by a guy who does Facebook groups. And he has an amazing ministry. And so people who are thinking about leaving or people who have already left are part of his groups. And I think that's very successful. But you have to understand that the Mormons have done their best to come up to the 21st century. So they used to carry these big backpacks with all their books, their scriptures and all the rest. Now they are carrying a tablet that has all of their scriptures on it and other things that they need. And so, but the internet has had a huge impact. So they're not going to ask you to go to other sites. They're going to want you to go to LDS.org, their official website. But I'm going to say that if you can, you can show them the information that's available on the internet. We have a website called mrm.org. MRM.org stands for Mormonism Research Ministry. We have tons of videos and articles. We have a daily podcast that Bill and I do that you can go through 1,700 plus shows. And there's so much information there. And so certainly that has been a benefit to us. But the Mormon Church certainly is very much involved with the 21st century, and they're going to point you in the way of LDS.org.
But we have stuff that we can point them in the direction to, and
right.
Yeah. So
now, sometimes, Ron, I want to kind of prep you here a little bit, because sometimes they get really angry about those who try to discredit Mormonism, and we have those that operate within the evangelical church who do the same thing. One of them is Benny Hinn, who actually
we unfortunately World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone. They have a special announcement for everybody today. Your spiritual rights are under attack. People who oppose your teaching are criticizing you by name in public. Are you looking for that one verse in scripture that says, if you don't like them, kill them? Well, we have something even better. It's the Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun.
Yeah.
Yes, because you just don't have to take it anymore. It's fully automatic, no waiting for results. High capacity magazines means you can wipe out every detractor. And a high caliber weapon means you can blow their heads off. Yes, the Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun is available only at World's End Theology Outlet. And so when you really get angry, you need something.
Yeah.
But what's it like? Okay, you're an evangelical. You're living in Salt Lake City proper, or in the...
I live in Sandy, which is another town about a 25-minute drive from Salt Lake,
and
on the 15.
You're surrounded by Mormons, right?
Oh, about 60% of officially are LDS. And so, yes, we have a church on every corner, but they're with steeples and no crosses on them. And yeah, it's a different culture. There's no doubt.
When you go into Salt Lake City itself, is the percentage higher, or is it the same pretty much in that whole region, 60-40?
In Salt Lake County proper, I think it's under 50%. It's very much a city. Yes, it's we have a very liberal population living in Salt Lake City. We have a very high, for instance, homosexual population that lives here. Our homosexual parade is bigger than many in the West. I mean, it's amazing the impact. The University of Utah is downtown. And so yeah, you're more likely, if you go in the rural areas, that towns can be 70 or 80% LDS. Where I live, I would guess it's about 50 to 60% where I live in Sandy. But the Christian population is well less than 2%.
Evangelical Christian. Okay.
Evangelical Christian, between 1% and 2% is what they estimate.
So if you're in that 40%, what would you guess is most of that?
Most of that would be atheist, agnostic, skeptic. I don't care. That would be most. And then you do have, we have a little bit of everything here, but yeah, we have more skeptics. I would think right after Mormonism, skepticism is number 2.
And how much of that is ex-Mormons?
Oh gosh, probably majority. Yes. And that's because our population is so heavy Mormon. And so everybody who is not LDS, who hasn't moved from out of state like I have, they've lived here pretty much all their lives. They grew up Mormon, most likely, or they left 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
And doesn't the LDS Church, aren't they concerned? We're losing so many people right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, I think there is a concern. I don't think they thought their gospel topics essays that I talked about earlier in the hour were going to have such an effect. But as I said, since 2013, Sandra Tanner has told me personally that before 2013, hardly anybody ever came in to possibly leave the church. Now, every week, she has people not only coming in who are thinking of leaving the church, but who have already left the church. And I know that because I've been helping out the last few years at her bookstore, that I'm going to say half of everybody who comes into that store is either a Mormon or former Mormon.
And it's because these gospel topic things, these are booklets, or they're online, or both, or
they're online. I'll tell you what, a good place to go if you want to see all of them, because you have to actually click a couple of times on LDS.org to be able to find them. If you go to our website, mrm.org, and click under articles and essays, all article categories, we have a topic that's called Gospel Topics Essays, and it's actually mrm.org/gospel topics with a hyphen between gospel and topics. If you go there, we have links to their articles as well as written responses to each of those articles. And then we have done podcasts called Viewpoint on Mormonism. We have done on each one of those. But these, I tell you what, these are the most important things that have come out in the last 30 years and it has caused a major stir in Mormonism. So I think you're right. They don't want people to be leaving the church, but they put these out, and I think they were thinking, well, we'll say we were honest by putting out this information, and they have gotten a lot of people leaving the church thinking that the church is not true anymore. So a lot of things now they kind of stay silent on. For instance, homosexuality. Back years ago, they had a Proposition 8 in California that the Mormon Church sponsored, that, marriage is between a woman and a man. They helped sponsor that. Well, now they seem to have taken a step back. They're not really involved in that anymore. In fact, they put together a website called mormonsandgays.com, and that website is basically saying we want to get along with the homosexual community. And so it's been interesting because the left here in Salt Lake City has very much tried to make homosexuality an accepted practice within Mormonism, and I just don't think they're ever going to come to that point. But there was an article in yesterday's Salt Lake Tribune, and there's a club since 2010 that's been trying to get officially registered at BYU, the official University of the Mormon Church. It's an LBGQ club that over 100 people attend their meetings. And these are people in the closet pretty much. They're not allowed to be out, if you're going to be a member of the church. But they want to have the ability to have an official club there, and the church is just basically ignoring their requests. But they're hoping in the next year or two that they'll actually have that as well.
It's interesting that you're talking about these articles where they thought, okay, well, let's be honest about this, and that'll help kind of keep our people in. Another group, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, Jehovah's Witnesses, did a similar kind of a thing in the early 1980s. They had their failed prophecy of 1975. They were losing a lot of people. And so they allowed them to kind of start reading the Bible without Watchtower material, just having Bible studies. The problem was they had an increase in people leaving as they were just reading the Bible. And they started a series in 1983 called Avoid Independent Thinking. The sin of Adam and Eve in the garden was independent thinking. And in this series, they say there are those who think they can study the Bible alone or in small groups, but strangely, such Bible reading has caused them to revert back to the doctrines that pagan Christians had taught 100 years ago. So my question is, if you're reverting back to the doctrines Christians has been teaching for 2,000 years by just reading the Bible, what do you suppose the Bible teaches? So the Mormon Church, you would think, would have learned from watching other groups who did that previous. It hasn't worked out well.
No, it has not.
I like, here's one. You were talking about Lynn Wilder, and she's one of your contributors, Dr. Lynn Wilder. Authentic, Humble Dialogue with Mormons, the Columbo Approach. Love the title.
That's just one more thing. Just one more thing. Go ahead. No.
Well,
I just do my Columbo.
Oh yeah, I got you. And the raincoat and the glass eye. Peter Falk played a great Columbo. She actually took that from Greg Kokel in his book Tactics that I had mentioned earlier. Basically to ask lots of questions. In fact, that's one of the major themes throughout many of the chapters is you can't tell the Latter-day Saint what he or she believes. You've got to ask them, let them come and let them give the evidence for why they believe the way they do, to take the offensive by asking questions. And so that's her main idea is Mormonism. When you take it beyond the facade, there really isn't a whole lot behind the curtain. There is no Oz, the wizard that's running it. It's corrupt. When you take a look at what the Bible teaches, and Mormonism does not come up to par with what the Bible is teaching as far as doctrine goes. And that's her main point. Ask lots of questions.
All right. I like that.
So the book is sharing the good news with Mormons.
And we have a website too that I would invite you to go to, sharingwithmormons.com. Sharingwithmormons.com, one word. You can actually find there on their interviews with all of the different contributors, videos. We have bonus chapters on that website as well. So sharingwithmormons.com, we invite you to go there. And there's links to the different places where you can buy the book on that website.
So I want to go to sharingwithmormons.com.
Yep.
All right, good. Well, you know, this is the first time we've had you on, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the future to do something. But we're excited about this book. We're glad you came out with it, and it's going to be a great resource for people. And in my opinion, as I've said, I think everything that's in here really can be translated into other mission endeavors, Jehovah's Witnesses, International Churches of Christ, because it's the same kind of a problem that you run into. You know, you're combating the one church syndrome, and everyone has different approaches that work for them. My approach works for me, but may not work for you.
Right.
My wife and I are very different. She loves using Watchtower material and talking to Jehovah's Witnesses. I like using the Bible, their Bible. I don't use my Bible. I like using their Bible best. And so we make a pretty good team because we have different approaches that we're comfortable with. And we always are trying to figure out, okay, why are they a Jehovah's Witness? Because that factors in. As I said earlier, if they're a Jehovah's Witness because they just never had friends, or because the Jehovah's Witnesses helped them find gainful employment and no one else did, or something like that, then some of the doctrinal stuff is just not going to really impact them. So
right. And that's what this book is. So that's the strength of this book. So many different ideas, not one way of doing it. Like we get that question, the silver bullet, as you mentioned. And so you choose your way and then do it to as much success as God will give you.
Absolutely. Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Well, let's just do that. Give credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just in Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polygamous. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical research assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of which are totally responsible for this content. But you'll never, ever be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, ever, never. Won't happen.
Not a possibility. So,
all right. We will talk to you all later. Thank you, Eric. Ron, I will talk to you in a day or two.
Thanks for having me.